had a really good question the other day come through about Swift Playgrounds, and since this is what we're going to be talking about a lot, I thought I'd dive into it a little bit. So the question was specifically about the Sensor Arcade Playground book. How do I reuse some of those elements, like the cupcakes and everything? So if we take a quick look over here on the iPad, you can see the Sensor Arcade Playground here. This is a really fun playground book that lets you explore a lot of the sensors in your iPad. So the camera will give you light information, the microphone, lots of interesting information here. So if we tap on that, we can go to the table of contents here and see that we're using different sensors. We've got a bunch of different games that we build. And the question was, how do I use some of those assets to sort of build some of my own games? And this is a great thing to do in your classroom. I won't comment on whether or not it's a good idea to do and distribute on your own. But you can see that there's some source files in here that we can check out. And here it's pretty simple. There's not a lot going on. If we tap back on main in Catching Cupcakes, we can see, again, not a whole lot of code. So when we hit run my code, we'll see that cupcakes show up on the screen. I can tap on my little astronaut guy and try to catch some of these. But there's a whole lot going on to create this scene that I can't see just in Swift Playgrounds itself, or at least not immediately. So one thing you can do is you can go into the advanced menu. So we'll go up to here to the three dots, tap on that, choose the advanced, and say view auxiliary source files. That's going to bring up a whole new sheet and all of our source code for our Swift Playground. This is what I love about Swift Playground books. It's a little bit like the early days of the internet, where you could just go to a web page, view source, copy it, and then you've got your own copy of whatever website you were just checking out. It's a little more difficult now because they're a bit more involved. But this is the same kind of thing because we can go and access the source code that they use to build this playground book. So we have a chapters folder. In there is where we have all of we have our first playground chapter, our pages. We can see our Catching Cupcakes playground page. And we have a few Swift files here. The live view. And we just have to tap on the screen here to see what goes on there. Again, fairly simple. And the main view. Now, this is what we see inside Swift Playgrounds, but you can see there's a lot more going on than what we saw on the page because a lot of this is hidden code. We don't want to clutter up our learners' field of view. We want to just have them focus on certain things. But this is a lot of code that's there to support you when you're actually writing code in main.swift. So we can see a lot of stuff going on. We can also go and have a look. The way Apple's organized a lot of these Swift Playground books is they've put the code into modules. So if we go back and back again, we can see this modules folder. And we can see all these SPC game, SPC live view. So it's a lot of stuff that Apple have reused throughout some of their playground books. That might be for the tutorials that you see. They've done a really nice job on the tutorials throughout the Swift Playground books. Or it just might be communication between the live view and the code of the Swift Playground book. So we can see there's a Catching Cupcakes page. We can look at the sources, and here's the source. This is different than the other file that we saw that was in the user module. But if you're looking for, well, how do they create those sprites that are showing up on the screen? Because they're using SpriteKit to display these resources, and SpriteKit is Apple's 2D game framework. How do they display those on the screen? How do they get that image that then they add to the scene that then you can interact with or you can drive around the screen? And this is a great place to start looking. So we can see we've got some learning trails because there are some assessments that are done so that the authors of the playground book can figure out when you've successfully completed a task. They'll analyze the code that you wrote or maybe the effects that you've created by writing some code, and you see how that all turns out. So this is one way we could look into how do they create those cupcakes. But I'm going to show you a different way that might make your life a little bit easier. Now, this is on an iPad right now with Swift Playgrounds, and that is the main focus of what these live streams are going to be about. I want you to take advantage of those iPads you have either at home or in the classroom. But we also have Xcode on the Mac, and this is a great way to inspect these resources. So what I've done is I've airdropped this Sensor Arcade over to my Mac. You can see I've got it right here. And what I can do is I can actually open this up. If I go to say open, it's going to ask me if I want to open it in the Playgrounds app. Well, I don't want to do that. I have the Mac version of Swift Playgrounds on my Mac here. But what I want to do is I want to use Xcode. So what I can do is just do Command O to open up this dialog, and I can pick the playground book that I want to open and just hit open. Now at first this looks a bit uninteresting because it's just a shot of the icon for the package, which is not super interesting. So what I want to do is hit Command 1 to show the project navigator, and I can see that there's a lot more going on. In fact, I can see that same layout that we just saw on the auxiliary source files. So I can I'm holding on the Option key and tapping on the arrow, and that'll open up a few of these pages for me. This is where we dove into a little bit earlier. And just like we saw before, we can see a lot of our hidden code. This is in the main. This is what will show up in the that main playground interface in Swift Playgrounds. We can see that a lot happens. If you're building your own playground book, these are such great examples of how to do it really well, because they've got the communication set up between the Swift Playground code that you're going to write as a user, and then the code that's actually running what's going on in the live view. You can also see down here that we've got the modules folder, and there are a whole bunch more. In fact, I can bring this over to see the actual names of them. We've got some SPC core. And if you're really bored, again, if you're a teacher following this, I'm sure you're bored, and you've got loads of time on your hand, you can go dig through these files and have a good idea of, well, okay, this is how you would structure your code. Now, that's interesting if you're a coding teacher. If you're a teacher who's like, look, I've dabbled in code a little bit, this might not be super interesting. But if you're an engineer out there working as an app developer, this is a great place to learn how to architect your code really well. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at, we want to find the cupcakes. Where do we create the cupcakes? Well, one thing we could do is, and the advantage that we have using Xcode here is we could actually just type in cupcake and search for it. And we can see this generate cupcakes function call here. That looks kind of likely. We have a create cupcake call. This is where we're actually defining the method. So maybe this is our best bet. And we can see that in the breadcrumbs here, it's in document 1.playground chapter, pages 00.playground page in the main code. So again, this is in that hidden code. So if you are looking for how to create a sprite with a cupcake, this is how it's done. Now, this isn't as simple as saying, oh, well, let me just, in my own project, I'm just going to copy and paste this into my own project. This is where you start to get a little bit surgical. You have to go and maybe grab this function, put it in your code somewhere, figure out, okay, what else do I need? All right, well, I need this graphic name .cupcakes. So maybe I can try to jump to that definition. Okay, cool. I've just jumped to it. It's in the same file, in fact. And we've got a graphic name of cupcake, player, display label, or score. And we follow it down a little bit of a rabbit hole here. But hopefully this is enough to get you started, because it shows us, and up here we can in fact kind of browse the contents of this file by just tapping on this graphic name here that we're on, and see that we have start practice, present restart, end game, generate cupcakes with an interval and disappearing after. But this is the core of where we're creating a cupcake by getting a sprite with a certain image, with a certain name. We're given an X position and a Y position somewhere in the grid. And then we're calling the scene place our cupcake at a certain point. And then we're also having it fade out. So in this sprite class, if we jump to that definition, now this might fail because Xcode doesn't work quite as well with Swift Playground books. So we can see it's kind of thinking about it for a while. What we might want to do is actually just search for sprite. Now we can have a guess that this might be a class or it might be a struct. So we could even try to help narrow down our search by saying class sprite. Okay, great. So there it is. It's in this SPC scene sources. And we can see how they're wrapping this around SK sprite nodes from that sprite kit framework. So hopefully that's giving you an idea. There's a lot in there. We've just opened up a whole gigantic can of worms. But if you are curious and you have the time and the energy, this is definitely something you could dig into. You could take a look at these playground books. You have all the source there, so you can go digging and say, all right, I want to implement something that looks a lot like this myself. All right, a fairly short and sweet one today. That was really specifically addressing one person's question about, hey, where do I get those cupcakes from Sensor Arcade? I really want to build my own kind of game around something like that. So hopefully that answers the question. All right, until next time, we'll see you soon. And when we come back, I promise you we'll be talking about much simpler stuff where we're looking at Swift Playground books and how you can teach them in your classroom and what resources there are available to you. All right, see you soon.